Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to this Moonrise X Spaces. Today we'll be talking about how we are advancing towards this integrated Web3 architecture. And as we roll out the Moonrise initiative, this new phase for Moonbeam, you will notice more and more impactful integrations with amazing projects, brilliant teams that piece by piece will help us shape this seamless integrated Web3 framework that we all envision. Today I have here with me four brilliant minds that has shaped and are shaping this new era for Web3. We have Aaron Evans from Moonbeam Foundation, Derek Yu from Moonsong Labs, Francisco Agosti from Moondance Labs, and Jacob Blish from Glacis Labs. And folks, if you have any questions, please put a comment here, drop your questions down below, just write it down, and we will try our best to cover them at the end of this panel. I would love if you guys can give a quick introduction about yourself, maybe present yourself and the project that you are representing here. Maybe we can start with Aaron.
Hey, sure. Thanks, Tiago. So I'm Aaron Evans, and I'm head of operations at the Moonbeam Foundation. I've been in enterprise software development for the past 25 years, much of that in the Web 2 world. Prior to joining the Moonbeam Foundation, I was head of engineering at a B2B Web 2 SaaS company that focused on cloud communications. I got into Web 3 when, I've known Derek for many years, worked with him at various startups, and in 2020 he told me about this Moonbeam project that some folks are working on, and I've been keeping an eye on the space and was attracted to Web3 as a major disruptor across a variety of sectors, and so jumped at the opportunity to join the Moonbeam Foundation. Moonbeam Foundation's mission is to foster the development and adoption of the Moonbeam and Moonriver ecosystems. It's an EVM-compatible Layer 1 blockchain deployed as a paired chain on Polkadot. And as you mentioned, we're focused on reducing friction and complexity for builders so they can, in turn, create integrated Web3 applications with a superior user experience.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, and if you mentioned Derek, and Derek, if you can go next.
Sure thing. So I'm Derek Yu. I'm the CEO of Moonsong Labs. We work on the Moonbeam protocol from an engineering perspective, among other things. And my background, similar to Aaron, also have a pretty lengthy background in software development. So in building kind of software companies for a long time. That's probably about 25 years now. Mostly in the Web 2 space, but since 2019 in the Web 3 space, and I definitely like it more on this side of the fence. I'm not going back to Web 2 anytime soon. I think that's me.
All righty. Yeah, Francisco, maybe you can give a quick intro and talk about Moondance and some of the initiatives there.
Yeah, sure. First of all, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm Francisco. I'm the CEO of Moondance Labs. Moondance Labs is one of the core contributors to Tansy, which I'm sure we'll get into later on in this space. Prior to co-founding Tansy, I was on the Moonbeam team, so helping out with ecosystem development and ecosystem growth. I actually met Derek before when I was working in a traditional tech startup, and he kind of started telling me about Moonbeam, and yeah, I was immediately kind of compelled by the idea and the vision, so I didn't really think twice, and the rest is history. So I've kind of been involved in Web3 since then.
Yeah, that's great. Last but surely not least, Jacob.
Hey, thank you. My name is Jacob. I'm the CEO of Glacis Labs, not another moon named project. And we actually are building a agnostic routing and firewall layer for protocols to abstract the underlying messaging between chains. Our goal is to make the application and UX similar to Web 2, where a user shows up to achieve what they want to do, and all the additional complexity and mental overhead is kind of stuffed under the hood. I've been in the space for about 8 years. I found it during my time at JP Morgan Chase when I was supposed to be working on banking things. Got a little sidetracked, but primarily I've been working in the space in BD operations strategy, and I've worked at Consensus, co-founded Spruce ID, Near Protocol, and most recently with Lido. So a little bit all over the place.
Yeah, I guess we all got a little bit sidetracked at some point in time before we get into this Web3 space.
It tends to happen.
Yeah. Well, the Moonbeam team recently revealed this Moonrise initiative. It's a new look for the brand, but I think more importantly, is this ambitious product roadmap that includes upgrades, programs, and partnerships with everyone on this panel and more. Let's step into the roadmap a bit, and I think it's a good way to kick things off. Maybe Aaron, could you give us like a high-level overview of the Moonbeam's roadmap? What's the big initiatives, major problems that you're trying to solve here?
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, there's a lot in it, so I'll try not to go on too long here. But as I mentioned, Moonbeam's focused on being the best place to build integrated Web3 applications. I think everyone, listening now knows, and this is a commonly held belief, that Web3 applications are generally just difficult to use, especially when you're crossing ecosystem boundaries. Users have to use a variety of interfaces, different wallets, dApps, et cetera, to accomplish what really should be very simple and easy to do things. Moonbeam, we're looking to remove these points of friction. And I think, the group in this panel is a really excellent example of work being done by different teams that can come together to solve these problems. When it comes to, a key work stream toward delivering frictionless user experiences is the Zero Knowledge Initiative that we recently announced that we're working with with the Moonsong Labs team. The first feature is called ZK Auth. And at a high level, ZK Auth will allow dApp developers to onboard users with the Web2 auth experience that they're familiar with. So users will be able to create and manage a Web3 account using, say, their Google login, for example, but while still preserving their privacy. In addition, dApp developers will be able to integrate the login experience directly into their applications for a more seamless experience and to control that experience. And they'll have the ability to configure an expiry time sometime in the future so that users don't have to re-authenticate or sign every time there's an on-chain transaction. So we think that'll go a long way to making a really amazing and more Web2-like experience. We're doing a lot of stuff to, in the general Web3 space to create a more integrated Web3 experience across the ecosystem. The Glacis team we're working with to abstract away complexities of bridging and GMP protocols, but at the same time, increasing reliability and security that people have come to expect in the Web2 world. So builders will be able to easily create cross-chain applications without being locked into a specific GMP protocol like Layer 0 Wormhole, and at the same time benefit from redundancy and failover. It also opens the door to more secure cross-chain interactions where, maybe you have to have validation across two routes before it's committed. And then lastly, speed and scale are obviously very important as well. Coming from the Web2 world, where, you deal in kind of millions of transactions per second, a lot of work has yet to be done to kind of achieve the kind of scale that's going to be needed to really make Web3, used by everyone. So in the next month or so, block times are going to be cut in half on both Moonbeam and Moonriver down to 6 seconds. So, I mean, right there, that's going to increase the user experience quite a bit. We'll see an 8x improvement in throughput thanks to asynchronous backing. But beyond this, builders may decide they need to build a custom app chain in order to scale depending on their use case. So here we're partnering with the Tansy team so that builders can launch an app chain on Tansy, but still benefit from the infrastructure that is deployed on Moonbeam. So DeFi infrastructure, gaming infrastructure. In particular, we recently added a user interface in the Moonbeam dApp for MRL, so Moonbeam Routed Liquidity. And this allows the flow of assets between ecosystems like Ethereum and other parachains. And we're working on some optimizations to ensure that Tansy app chains can easily leverage this functionality, as well as DEXs and NFT marketplaces on Moonbeam. So those are just some of the things in the roadmap, but specifically, amazing examples where we're working with the teams on this panel to make a more frictionless experience.
That's so exciting. When we see this whole new Moonrise initiative, the new branding, the new look, the new roadmap, everything that Moonbeam has delivered in the past. It's like it's very exciting to see like this future vision put in on paper, and a lot of projects that are mature enough, built by amazing crews here that is working together. I'm very excited to see what's going to be the new applications and solutions that I don't think we can even foresee at this point in time, right? Like after we enable, right, after all those enabling technologies that are built and developed and ready to go. I would love to go deeper a little bit into the collaborations. You mentioned Moonsong Labs for the ZK. Surely we're going to touch base with the Moondance Labs teams and Glacis as well. But maybe we can start. Maybe we can start with Jacob. Jacob, could you give a little bit more in-depth overview on Glacis and where's the synergy that you see between Glacis and Moonbeam?
Yeah, for sure. Moonbeam was actually the birthplace of Glacis from the last cycle during all the various bridge hacks. Um, and it kind of was born out of a need. And I saw a similar problem when I was doing business development over at Lido, where Lido got sufficiently big, billions of assets under management, and they weren't willing to take specific vendor lock-in risks anymore. Because at that time, we lost hundreds or billions of user assets worth of value. But in my mind, most of the infrastructure still needs to be really abstracted under the hood. Developers, users, and like liquidity providers need to make way too many decisions about where and how they want to interact on chain. Um, One of the things is that Polkadot as an ecosystem is very tightly integrated together. But as we're seeing kind of at the macro level, there's most likely going to be a few of these tightly integrated stacks. So we still need to have communication that works seamlessly and in an agnostic way between both of them. Um, Specifically, what we do is we help in the context of Moonbeam. We help application developers who want the specific features of Moonbeam in the Polkadot ecosystem, such as like native governance, XCM for cross-chain messaging, Moonbeam routed liquidity as mentioned, or dedicated block space through something like Tansy. But be able to access users where they are instead of deploying multiple instances of the same protocol that have to be managed, audited, and integrated. And generally, our ideal customer are the developers that want to focus more on the UX side of things at the application layer and not have dependency on kind of the infrastructure and transport. So what Glacis really does is it allows you to choose programmatically as a developer how you communicate and transfer that communication of information, think data packets of Web 2, between users and what they're attempting to solve.
That's amazing. And I have a bunch of questions for you, but I'll let Derek go next. I would love to hear more about the ZK initiatives, the Moonsong Labs, and how is it, like Moonsong Labs team is fits into this Moonbeam's roadmap.
Yeah, and I have a few thoughts. Maybe I'll just give on some of the things that I even heard already. Aaron's review of the roadmap and some of the comments Jacob was just making. But again, yeah, just where Moonsong fits in is, we have a really great protocol engineering team, so we're doing a lot of the technical implementation work, like around a lot of these features that are being discussed. I want to just go a little bit to what Aaron talked about. When he talked about kind of the theme, right, of the roadmap, is around user experience, improving user experience, but also on he was using this term integrated Web3. And like I don't know that people necessarily, it might be worth just to pause for a minute and dig into like what does that like mean, like, or what does integrated Web3 mean, and like why is it that may make like user experiences better. And so this is kind of my just my opinions here, but like from my point of view, the whole idea that like Polkadot and Cosmos in a lot of ways like pioneered was, you can't like there's going to be a scalability problem, right? So like, you can have a single chain, you can make it like pretty scalable. I mean, the folks at Solana have pushed it like further than I thought was possible. So they, like they have a very scalable chain, but like you're going to hit a limit at some point, right? If you're trying to onboard like, all of like the the use cases that will ever be in the world, like a single chain is just like not gonna cut it. You need like multiple chains to parallelize. That's the same way computers work, right? You don't have like one giant computer that everyone shares. We have many computers like around us for the same reasons that are specialized into like different, form factors, different like types of functionality. You have GPUs these days and so on. And so you need like multiple chains. And I think this is like where you start getting like into a lot of these usability problems, right? So if you have like multiple chains, this becomes problematic for users when they're trying to use some system, and it's like, oh, okay, it's actually, this chain here, and then there's this bridge, and then, you have to click 17 times, and then, maybe there's 3 chains that are servicing the app. This is where you start getting into big problems. And I think that, what I saw like early on with Polkadot was, hey, here's like, we have this like this SDK for building chains that you can customize. So that's obviously a huge, great element. But you have this environment that multiple specialized chains can like interoperate like around. And it's, while it's obviously taken like a long time to build a lot of these things, I think we're at the moment now where we're starting to realize like the benefits of having this, both this toolkit as well as this like common environment where we can interoperate. And so then you have things like the scenarios that we started talking about, where you can have, Moonbeam is supplying a lot of shared services, like DeFi. It has a whole DeFi ecosystem. It's got NFT marketplaces. It's got like a lot of valuable things that you wouldn't necessarily want to replicate if you have your own chain. But you can do something like you can have a Tansy container chain where you can put a lot. Now you have your own chain, your own block space. You can control the user experience around like performing on-chain actions. But at the same time, you can like leverage shared services like on something like Moonbeam. So you kind of get this like whole is greater than some of its parts. You can like leverage different chains and like their specialties, but create like a single user experience. So that I think that to me is kind of the key idea here. And by the way, this idea is not something that's like specific anymore to Polkadot or Cosmos. I mean, when Moonbeam was started as a project, it was really those were the 2 games in town. But now you can see that the same idea has made its way and taken root in like Ethereum, where you have, basically all of the L2s pursuing similar like ideas, right? Where it's kind of like use our tech stack. You're going to be able to build a roll up. If you use our tech stack, your roll up will be interoperable with other roll ups using the same tech stack. And while they're kind of less mature, I'd say it's like the idea is there and it's here to stay. And so I think Jacob mentioned this. There's likely to be multiple of these like multi-chain interoperable ecosystems forming, and they can communicate within each other, but they also need to communicate like across. You'll need to communicate across these different multi-chain interoperable ecosystems. So I think this is these are like quite interesting ideas to me. I think that putting it all in kind of focusing on the user and creating better user experiences is like the right way to think about things. User experiences are still quite poor in Web3, and like you can see that they almost get worse now. Like as you have more chains, you can see this very clearly on Ethereum with its L2s, right? You have so many different L2s now, and people get confused about like, well, like where do I sign this? Do I sign this on Arbitrum or on Mainnet, or like where am I even? And so I think that like that's the moment that we're in right now, is people understand that you need multiple chains to scale, but there's these challenges around the user experience that need to be solved, and interoperability is a big part of being able to solve those challenges. And I like Jacob's comments that a lot of the ideas that are in Glacis are definitely applicable to things to Moonbeam, where you want to be able to create this abstraction layer, right? So you want to be able to allow devs to do things cross-chain, to create cross-chain experiences, but have the user not necessarily need to know all the details of the underlying bridges being used. So for me, a lot of the UX problem is solved by like better and higher level abstractions, right? So that the user needs to know less and less about like the underlying components or infrastructure elements they're interacting with. Just like in Web 2, right? You don't know about all the servers you're interacting with. And like cross-chain interoperability is a key part of that picture. So I see that as some of the unifying, kind of principles around a lot of the work that's being done in the roadmap.
And that's really impressive, Derek. Like as you speak and you talk about improving user experience, which we all agree is something that we have a problem in the Web3 space since 2009, to be honest. right? When we think about like buying Bitcoins from getting Ethereum and downloading wallets and saving seed phrases and all this stuff. I guess getting to that level where we understand that we will reach like this global scale and get to the masses, we need to deeply improve like the user experience. And I think this roadmap clearly states that, right? Like it's solving a problem once at a time. And I like that you also touch on this point of interoperability. Um, and I'm giving my 2 cents here as a host. I'll pass the mic shortly to Francisco, but I like the fact to think that everything that we are working on this roadmap with Glacis and Tansy, the fact that I really like about it is when we say like we're built on top of Polkadot, it's about this future proof architecture that we have, right? It's the capacity to be able to adapt to a new future without developing some schema or some scenario architecture that is going to be the next scenario architecture for the next 3 or 4 years. We are we are very adaptable because of the substrate layer and so on. So this is very exciting. And talk about excitement, surely we have to ask Francisco about Tensi. There's a bunch of people interested and eager to learn more about Tensi and everything that is going on there. Maybe Francisco, can you chime in and give your view on your current status of Tensi and what are the synergies, what are the potentials that we're going to reach between Tensi and Moonbeam?
Yeah, for sure. So Tansy is essentially an app chain infrastructure protocol. So at a high level, we're really just making it a lot easier for developers to launch and run their own chains, right? Their own app chains or parachains, whatever you want to call them. The idea for Tansy actually came from our experience in building Moonbeam. I think Derek mentioned this at the beginning, right? That like back in the day, if you wanted to build a chain, the two prevalent tech stacks were the Cosmos SDK and Substrate. They already made it significantly easier to build chains. For various reasons, we kind of decided to go with Polkadot at that time. But we quickly realized that even though Substrate makes it easier to build chains, there's still a significant amount of work that like falls on the development team to launch the chain, right? Having to do things like, well, this is Polkadot specific, but you have to kind of win a parachain slot. Then you have to bootstrap like block production nodes. There's an evaluation process that happens with these kind of node runners and performance. If some of them run them poorly, then you launch the chain and there's a bunch of maintenance that goes into it, right? You have to take care of like runtime upgrades. Then you quickly realize you need a bunch of tools like block explorers, indexers, oracles, RPC endpoints, bridges, wallets. So there were just so many infrastructural variables that went into the deployment process of the chain that ultimately it resulted in a time to market of like 12 plus months, right? So we quickly realized that the developer experience was really like not good. And in parallel, the app chain space as a whole had been growing significantly, right? Like Derek mentioned, it was no longer just called the Cosmos SDK and Substrate. It was also, there's a bunch of rollups as a service now, Avalanche subnets. Pretty much every ecosystem in Web3 has some sort of like app chain specific or rollup specific tech stack, right? So that's really when we decided to go all in on Tansy. And yeah, Tansy itself is a layer one. You can kind of think of it as a layer one to help deploy other layer ones. And we're doing that by providing kind of block production as a service at its core, right? It is a permissionless protocol. So all the block production nodes of Tansy's layer one are going to be shared and decentralized, and they're all going to be producing blocks on behalf of all these app chains that deploy through Tansy. And we are leveraging right now the relay chain of Polkadot to benefit from shared security and settlement and finality. And in parallel, we're also working with all these kind of tools and providers, right? Like the RPC endpoints, the wallets, the indexers. The idea is to kind of automate that integration flow within the Tansy developer experience, so developers don't have to take care of all those things, right? We're kind of abstracting away all these infrastructural responsibilities from developers. So at the end of the day, the only thing that they have to take care of is like the application layer of the chain, whilst still benefiting from all the things that you get from dedicated block space, right? And yeah, I mean, I think Derek already alluded to this. Like Moonbeam is extremely strategic to Tansy because shared smart contract environments are just complementary to what Tansy offers, right? Which is essentially dedicated and sovereign block space. There's some use cases that need dedicated block space. Other use cases you need something like Moonbeam, right? Like shared liquidity is a great example of that. Having to bootstrap liquidity from scratch is extremely difficult. So tapping into existing kind of DeFi venues that are on Moonbeam already, that is just like more convenient and beneficial for teams, right? All the infrastructure that's on Moonbeam as well, like the NFT marketplaces and things like that. That's a great place to leverage Moonbeam, right? And I think we're going to start seeing a lot of these hybrid models that I'm sure we'll get into after. You know, I don't think this decision of deploying an app chain or utilizing smart contracts, it's not like a binary decision, right? I think we're going to see more and more use cases that leverage both, right? You might deploy contracts on Moonbeam or Ethereum while still kind of offloading specific logic of your application or workloads of your application to a dedicated container chain through Tansy. So yeah, I think the future is kind of heading in that direction. And with Glacis, I also think it's very strategic because interoperability is a big point, right? Like the more chains you have, the ability for them to communicate with each other becomes more important. Some ecosystems have kind of native interoperability baked into them, like XCM, what's XCM to Polkadot or IBC on Cosmos. But I think Glacis adds a lot of value in that regard because you're starting to kind of aggregate and route all these GMP protocols that just makes it a lot safer, right? Tansy chains that launch will also benefit from Moonbeam routed liquidity. So is another huge challenge for app chains, right? One of the biggest benefits of deploying smart contracts in a shared EVM environment like Moonbeam or Ethereum is that all contracts within that EVM kind of benefit from native composability with each other. But as soon as you build your own chain, you're kind of an island, right? Now you need to ask yourself, okay, how do I connect to
This space was downloaded via spacesdown.com. Visit to download your spaces today.
Moonbeam? How do I access DeFi there? How do I connect to Ethereum? Building a bridge is extremely difficult. Getting well-established bridges like Wormhole or Axelar or Layer Zero, Hyperlane, that's not like an easy task, right? Unless you're like a very well-established team that has a lot of KPIs and volume, these bridges are just not going to have the time of day to integrate with your chain. There's too many chains nowadays. So with Tansy, we're leveraging Moonbeam through XCM, right? Any Tansy chain that launches can connect back to Moonbeam through XCM. And then given that Moonbeam was already a hub of kind of interoperability, it already has these connections to Wormhole, to Axelar, to Layer Zero. All Tansy container chains can kind of have a secondary connection to all these well-established bridges through Moonbeam, right? Out of the box. And that's an extremely powerful concept that is uniquely enabled by Polkadot's architecture, right? So it's kind of this kind of bridging out of the box that you otherwise wouldn't get, right? So there's just a lot of kind of complementary angles that Tansy benefits from its connection or its collaboration with Moonbeam and Glacis and vice versa.
That completely blows my mind. Just to imagine the amount of brain power needed to make all those things happen. Not only Tansy app chains, but this invisible mesh, right, that connects all the dots and creates this cohesive framework for this integrated Web3 future. I'm sure the community is very, very excited to see all these new applications and solutions built on top of us. Francisco, maybe another question for you, but before question from my side, guys, again, if you have any questions, please make sure to drop down below, comment, and we will try to address all those questions at the end of this 1 hour here. Francisco, do you think it's right or is correct to say, as more I think about Tansy, and one of the killer features that we have on Tansy is the fact that because of the XCM, and XCM is very complicated to build, but once you guys build it for the builder that is built on top of Tansy, like everything becomes very seamless. But Tansy is an app chain that is very, very lightweight, right? Because it leverages all those interoperability that is, that it comes embedded with like any app chain, right? So working on DEXs, perps, NFTs, lending borrow market, like you can leverage anything that you want from Moonbeam side, while deploying like a very lightweight app chain, right? And I think that's somewhat done because of the substrate components and framework that you can build like this XCM out of the box, like in a very safe manner. But also the fact that, the app chains are not only lightweight, but they're very future resilient, right? Because it is a substrate layer that is upgradable within time and it can be added, more functionalities in the future. Do you agree with that? Do you see, uh, first of all, do you agree with that? And second, from all these use cases, right? Because the more I think about, like that old sentence and question that we used to ask ourselves, like, what's the next Ethereum killer, which clearly like doesn't exist anymore. Like we live in a Web3 space that is very plural. Um, I can see several use cases where app chains are, are extremely necessary for some specific use cases, from RWA to DeFi, Depin, Game, SocialFi. Can you also comment on which of those categories are you most excited about?
Yeah, sure. No, I do think XCM it plays a huge role, right? I think the problem with XCM right now is just the developer experience, right? It's kind of this like raw technology that is powerful. It allows for native communication between kind of app chains within the substrate environment. But there's a lot of tooling needed and like debugging tools needed within using XCM to make that experience better. So our team is trying to kind of make it just a lot easier to use, like with a basic UI, right? So that's one component of it. I do agree with this idea that you mentioned of like light app chains, so to speak, because I think the concept of app chains is going to evolve drastically in the next years, right? Right now, we kind of associate app chains like a developer launches kind of a full-blown chain that is producing blocks every 6 seconds, no matter what. And we've come to find that that model can be like capital inefficient, right? Because you kind of have to secure an entire blockchain. You have to get a bunch of validators to secure it. You have to find out how to incentivize them. Obviously, you don't want to have just a couple of validators for the sake of to have more decentralization, right? So it becomes more challenging to have a diversified validator set. And then you launch the chain, and a lot of developers realize that you might not need like a full chain's worth of kind of capacity, right? So I think Polkadot is shifting in this direction, and other ecosystems are as well. I'm already seeing this happening. It's kind of this on-demand model, so where you can kind of push a block or produce a block only when like you need it. And then that makes a lot of sense for developers that are just starting, right? And then if you see that you kind of start getting traction, then you can kind of go for a kind of full-blown chain because you're going to need the capacity. So I think this model is pretty exciting since it's going to significantly reduce the barriers of entry for developers to tap into dedicated block space. It's going to make it more cost efficient. And I think we're going to shift into this kind of more, and I know Derek talks about this a lot, like this kind of more cloud-like environment, right? Where developers can access dedicated block space through Tansi's protocol whenever they need it, while still kind of tapping into the contracts on Moonbeam. This is kind of why we're branding chains on Tansi container chains, since it's kind of containerizing or dockerizing the specific logic of your chain, right? Similar to what happened in Web 2 between monolithic architectures and microservices. I think we're going to shift a lot into that direction. And yeah, in terms of use cases, I think one that comes to mind is gaming makes a lot of sense. So we're starting to see a lot of games deploying via Tansy while they still want to like tap into Moonbeam. The Great Escape is a good example of that. So they list their tokens on Moonbeam. They list all their NFTs on Moonbeam since that's where all the NFT marketplaces are, and the liquidity is on Moonbeam on dexes like Stella Swap or Beam Swap. But then the game logic itself, what happens with fully on-chain games is that if a lot of the actions that you take in the game are on chain, that can be extremely tolling for block space, right? And on Moonbeam, you're just sharing block space with everybody, right? So if gas prices start to increase, that can make the user experience for gamers just inconvenient, right? If any action on the chain starts costing a lot of gas, that's just not going to be a good UX. So what the Great Escape is doing is that they're offloading the on-chain game logic to a dedicated kind of block space environment through Tansy, a container chain, while still having their token NFTs on Moonbeam. And you kind of get this kind of hybrid model that benefits from what each protocol is good at, right? Tapping into dedicated block space with Tansy while still leveraging shared liquidity on Moonbeam and infrastructure on Moonbeam. So I think we're going to start to, and it's connected through XCM, right? So I think we're going to start to see a lot more of those use cases. And who knows, right? It could just be like abstract logic that an application might use or workloads that get offloaded into a Tansy container chain, right? I think in general we're going to start to see more and more of these architectures, and it's all abstracted away from the user on the back end, right? Like the user has no idea that they're playing the game on like a Tansy container chain, while if they're like tokens or in-game kind of items or NFTs, that's happening on Moonbeam, which I think is pretty cool.
That's very exciting. Yeah, go ahead, Eric. Sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in because I like that example, and I think that maybe it's helpful to talk in examples versus theoretical. That so in that game, I think you're exactly right that this like dedicated block space like is something that like a shared environment this is like inherently like worse at, right? So like to get like dedicated block space in the container chain for the on-chain like gaming components or the game logic, that makes sense in the way to control the user experience. But again, like I think in the past people have said, well, I'm going to build this app chain, I need to go recreate everything now. That's a huge job. So if you can leverage a lot of these like shared components from Moonbeam, that makes a lot of sense. And just to make even a bigger picture here, right? One of the other projects that Moonsong Labs is working on is something called Storage Hub. So Storage Hub is a decentralized storage system. We're doing the kind of the engineering kind of implementation like for that would live on Polkadot that would allow you to store files, for example. So I can see a world where these NFTs that are part of the game, maybe are using like an NFT marketplace that's on Moonbeam, but the metadata for those games, the images, there could be video, there could be other larger like files. You can't really store those on Moonbeam very easily, or on a system that's not optimized for storage. So that's where something like Storage Hub could come in to provide a decentralized like storage system to store these larger files. And then I know that, for example, Jacob, that one of the things that the Glacis team has been exploring is like cross-chain, like natively like cross-chain NFTs, right? So NFTs that can move around like to like any chain where they're needed. And so that again creates this other abstraction layer where if you have these in-game items, they're living like as NFTs like on Moonbeam, their metadata is stored like on Storage Hub, let's say. But if they can also leverage something like Glacis to be able to move to any place that they're needed, whether that be another chain on Polkadot or outside, like to any supported chain. And so I think again going back to this user experience, as the user coming in to play this game, you might be using 3, 4, 5 different specialized chains, but creating that like user experience that like abstracts those chains away from the user. I think that's like the key. That's the way forward. And so, I like that example. And I think you start to see like a lot of these elements come together now in some of these scenarios. And it's like very hard to replicate that standalone game like this. And so I think this is where you start to get like pretty interesting effects. Jacob, I want to pass it over to you. So it looks like you were going to comment.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, it feels like we're compressing the entire history of the Web 2 developer experience in a much shorter time frame. Basically, we're rebuilding all of the microservices and experiences developers and need and tooling. And I agree, 99% of people are just not going to know if they're even using blockchain technology. And for me, I like to use the comparison of, if you're shopping on an e-commerce site, on Web 2, you click purchase, and at that exact time, your funds magically appear at the seller's destination. But what we've done today, and it's probably a product of an allergy to centralized and trusted systems, we've kind of swung the pendulum way too far the other way, where it's making every user do all the research, all the overhead, which wallets to use, how they're going to bridge there. And for the e-commerce example, it's like before you could make a purchase, you have to pre-fund your account. But before you can pre-fund your account, you have to tell your bank which pathing you would like to use in order to pre-fund your account so that you could ultimately purchase the thing you originally set out to do. And in my mind, that's just not scalable to what we view as the internet level scale, because unfortunately, most people in mass are just not going to do their own research. Most people, if they're using an app like Uber, they don't know if the storage for the app or the compute is on AWS or Microsoft, and they don't care. What they care about is the experience and the service that's provided. So I'm really excited about making it so that the user, in theory, in the future, can just purchase the service, the NFT, the thing that they want to do, and everything else is abstracted away. And it becomes very similar to a Web 2 type of experience. The difference being we settle onto a chain instead of a private database somewhere.
Yeah, and maybe if I could just add on to that, I mean, I think, going back to what Derek was saying about, a single chain can never handle sort of everything, right? And kind of as Jacob was saying too, we're sort of seeing this evolution that sort of parallels moving from the monolithic to microservices. And the challenges there, right, is the asynchronous nature of all these things that have to occur on these different ecosystems, on these different chains, on these different components. But yet, we have to solve that problem. In Web 2, when you're using these applications, it feels like everything is synchronous, but it's not. Like, even though, they have millions of transactions per second in Web 2, those stacks, those cloud platforms, those services that people use every day, like, are necessarily using asynchronous communication of things that, you don't always know which order things are going to come in. And that's just a problem that must be solved before we can truly bring Web3. We can truly Web3 enable, these applications that people use every day. Like whether it's social or gaming or whatever it is. And so, I think this group here, we're tackling this problem head on, and I think the importance of that can't be understated.
And I love, I don't know if that's the amount of coffee that I had this morning, but it makes me very excited to think about like all those things being developed. Because when I look at Tansy, you mentioned Storage Hub, there's Glacis, and what we already provide on Moonbeam and this roadmap. It feels like this is unleashing the real power of Polkadot, but even going beyond that, right? Like even making like it's not an ecosystem isolated scenario. It's where that's when Glacis comes in and brings like, enables everyone to use this power that we're unleashing here, but also getting connected to the other ecosystems as well. And I'd love to ask a question for you, Jacob, when it comes to interoperability, right? And you mentioned security a couple of times, and I'm sure everybody that thinks about bridges and general massive passaging, like passing, it's something that it's something that we got more mature along the way, and I think we're improving within time. But you can go a little bit deeper on the Glacis main things that you guys are solving in a more for the user side, right? As me as a user, that how do you think Glacis is actually solving that? And I think we gave some examples. I know that we have a good example with Moonbeam. I would love to hear more about one of those examples as well, so people are more get more familiarized and see the real power as well from Glacis.
Yeah, so we're with a lot of the customer calls, talking with other protocols, we're starting to see pieces of this emerge from the edges, and it's kind of unclear if the incumbents like an Aave or Uniswap are going to be able to adapt, or if it's going to be a new one that's bringing some net new tech to the user experience. But the vision we have at Glacis is a user shows up to your application, they do what they want to do, whether that's playing a game or social networking or making a purchase, and then they leave, and that's it. Everything else needs to be kind of abstracted away, and we're getting there. We've definitely made some big leaps and bounds, but the first step was kind of abstracting away single bridge failure. Just based on the last cycle, for those that were here, losing a couple $1 billion is generally considered unacceptable. And a lot of the larger protocols in the space, such as an Aave, a Lido, or a Uniswap, have all been building this abstraction and multi-message aggregation kind of feature in-house, which is a rare privilege. Only those that have the resources, the dev team, and the bandwidth can actually build something that's outside of their core competency. And the other thing is, as you integrate each additional kind of communication pathway or validation pathway, you're increasing the surface area for risk. You have to maintain those integrations, you have to update them, make sure they're audited. And again, as you move outside of that as your primary focus, you need trusted service providers, in this case Glacis, selfishly, to be able to handle some of that as a service provider. But some of the solutions that we started seeing are kind of turning the current model on its head. So for example, instead of deploying a lending protocol and having the user make that bridging decision, there's a couple that we've been speaking to that allow the user to simply deposit on any of the available chains, Arbitrum, Optimism, Moonbeam, doesn't matter, and they get a credit in the application. So if I deposit, 1 ETH, I have 1 ETH worth of credit to do what I want. And then I can borrow, let's say, a stable coin such as USDC against it on any of those chains as well. And what the protocol does is it handles the settlement using off-chain intents, which is super popular right now, to amortize the cost, give a better user experience. So for the user, they deposit anywhere, they borrow anywhere, and when they're ready to unwind their position on this lending protocol, they can, in theory, exit anywhere as long as there's the liquidity network. So we've started building, not us, but a lot of members in the bridging community have started building these kind of off-chain intense liquidity layers. And what those do is they give fast finality, lower slippage for a fee to the end user. But what it does, of course, is it introduces trust. So I think our space is going to be struggling to reintroduce trusted third parties, as it were. I think the important piece is allowing the user, as this becomes a more normal internet experience, to be able to optionally move to a more self-sovereign model where maybe they want to manage their own private keys and they want to do self-custody and they want to do their own bridging. But it comes with trade-offs, as was mentioned, like the synchronicity of different block times. A user is going to have to struggle through that firsthand. So I think that's going to be one of the big use cases. I also think like the intents of like Uniswap X, for example, but moving that more cross-chain will allow users to move funds if they so need to much more quickly and availably. Again, introducing a trust mechanism there. But that's kind of the whole idea that we're trying to evolve is right now we need this standard communication framework that allows different blockchains, aka different databases, to communicate to each other. We're not going to be the ones to make it, most likely, but I think the market will eventually force most of the incumbent communication layers to agree on some standard, whether that looks more like XCM or IBC or some Frankenstein version amalgamation of all of them.
It's really impressive. That's really, when I think about the future applications and what people will be trying to build, and what they're trying to build now, to be honest, like there is this need of getting into this integrated Web3, right? Like this is the main topic here is advancing into this integrated Web3. And when we see Moonbeam's roadmap and all those things like a constellation with all those stars, being placed there, like this interoperability, seamless interoperability made by Glacis. We have all the app chains and potential scalability from Tensi, and then Derek just mentioned about the storage hub as well, and seeing everything somewhat interconnected in this microservice level, not in a monolithic that requires 100 apps, to make sure everything works seamlessly with a good chance of attacks and hacks. I think we are definitely moving to the next phase of Web3, and I'm very excited to be here, and ask those questions because it's clearly what like as we see that this is definitely driving the future as we want to see in the Web3 space. So maybe a question for you, Aaron, going back to you. I would love to hear your thoughts, your 2 cents on this, right? I mean, we definitely have several components that are playing like a bigger role, right? That is reflected in the roadmap. But how do you see, like all these connections being made, and what is the relevance of Moonbeam in this future interconnected, ecosystem that we're building?
Sure. Yeah. No, I think Moonbeam, is providing, Francisco was talking about providing infrastructure to these app chains. It's providing a lot of the glue, right? I mean, it's a generic smart contract platform, so it provides glue to kind of connect all these things. And a lot of applications can be deployed as a set of smart contracts, and they can certainly be improved by some of the unique features that are offered on Moonbeam. But as we evolve to encompass more and more of applications into Web3, they do require specialization, and I think Moonbeam will continue to be this nexus of where these things all interconnect to enable these applications that are going to span different chains and services and ecosystems and so forth. And I think there's a lot we can do also to kind of improve the front end and user experience, right? I alluded to the ZK auth project at the beginning, where I think we can simplify a lot of the ways that people are signing or authenticating to transact, and make those applications a more seamless experience for end users. So I see Moonbeam as kind of, leading the way of like, finding and building out tooling and SDKs and so forth, and features in the core protocol to be that nexus of where these things come together to provide that integrated experience.
Yeah, and before we jump into the final thoughts here, I would love to hear, from Francisco and Jacob and Derek. But Aaron, could you touch base also on Moonriver? I think there's a lot of people excited about Moonriver and some initiatives that's happening there. Maybe you can give a couple of minutes just to talk about what's happening in Moonriver right now.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, there's for people who follow the community closely, they'll know that earlier this year, the community voted to use some of the parachain bond funds to join the Axelar Amplifier program. And so what this is Axelar is moving to a new architecture that they called Amplifier. So before, I think every time they needed to add a chain, there was like changes needed kind of at the consensus layer. Whereas this new architecture, obviates the need for that, so that it's easier to interconnect more chains, and also it's distributing the validation workload and so forth out to a little more decentralized and distributed across those ecosystems. So this is pretty exciting because Moonriver hasn't really had like a major bridge or GMP protocol in some time since kind of the multi-chain team, I guess, disbanded, I guess I would call it. And so, really excited about joining this program. And working with the Axelar team to deploy this to Moonriver. And then on top of that, we're launching. There's an initiative to for some grants to get a concentrated liquidity AMM on Moonriver, and then to start to, following on the heels of the Axelar deployment, which will probably happen perhaps late summer, to start building up depth of liquidity and building activity on Moonriver as well. So, stay tuned for that. I mean, there's more at the forums and so forth, details on that, but there'll probably be some grants and so forth announced to help build on that as well.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Derek, I would love to hear from you some final thoughts. We talked a lot about this roadmap, this advancing into this integrated Web3 future, and there's your vision it's really appreciated by a lot of people in our community. So I would love to hear your final thoughts and how you see like this whole thing coming together, and just hear like what do you see like as a big next step, right, from this.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as was already mentioned, it's just taken like a long time, I think, to build a lot of the necessary pieces, and for example, like XCM to reach like maturity levels that are needed for good usability. So everything always takes a bit longer than you think, but I think we're finally at the point where you really can leverage multiple services simultaneously to build like applications, and that's something that is like not the case elsewhere. So I see, that's like incredibly exciting and positive, as like there's these new services are coming online, like Tansy, Storage Hub, and like others. And I see them as like highly synergistic, like with Moonbeam, right? So like Moonbeam is going to benefit like from any of these other projects like that are deploying and getting traction. I think the thing that I spend time thinking about that's a little bit less clear to me is, again, I mentioned it, that we're kind of moving into a world where there kind of multi-chain interoperable ecosystems coexisting simultaneously, right? So I see the next several years as looking like that, right? I mean, you have obviously the OG Cosmos Polkadot, but now you're going to have these emergent like new L2 ecosystems that at least have like similar concepts behind them. And it's not clear, there's no kind of like clear winner. So we're going to live in this. We're going to live in this world where there's just like many of these things, right? And they're all like pretty well capitalized. So there's going to be you're going to be in this kind of, I don't know if balkanized is the right word, but kind of a kind of this like heterogeneous kind of like environment like for some time. I think for for Moonbeam and for Polkadot, like Aaron said it well, where Moonbeam's in this kind of like key spot, right? It's the hub, more or less, like that's like on Polkadot where most of the activity is happening, and that serves as this like central coordination point and place where you can get a lot of shared services. I think the question in my mind is how can these services, become useful to and get leveraged from like these other environments, like from these like L2 environments. And we spent some time like looking and working in these on some of these other tech stacks, and I will tell you that they are they are definitely interesting, but they are definitely and there's similarities, right, where they're kind of leveraging shared security, but there are differences too. They tend to, like, for example, when it comes to decentralization, they're like much further behind, right, and customization. Those like it's kind of this decentralization and customization are key strengths that that like substrate based chains have. And so I think that that's kind of the trick as I look forward is, how can the services that are like created like these like highly decentralized and customized like services, how can they be made useful like into these other like ecosystems, and how can they be extended to like reach users, where they are, a lot of them being in these like L2 ecosystems. So that's kind of like the thing I've been thinking about. And you look at it in that context, right? Having a bunch of interesting services is one thing, but having something like Glacis that can securely like connect these services back to like where they can be used like in other environments is like a critical capability as well. And so I see that all as part of this, let's say, creating this like Web3 cloud, right? This Web3 backend cloud. You have this kind of this engine, this capability where you can do lots of interesting things, but you have to connect it to demand where it exists. So I see a lot of these pieces coming together to help do that. But we have to kind of see again how it plays out too on where the demand is and like what happens with these other multi-chain interoperable ecosystems. And I think we're going to need to be kind of flexible as that like changes and plays out.
Yeah, that's great. Those are great questions to ask, right? And what really excites me is that from this panel here, everybody that's in here, the projects that you guys are representing are all made of very smart people, very professional individuals, and I guess I would like to hear from Francisco some final thoughts. Again, building an app chain and building like this whole ecosystem that you guys are building with the professional team, right? Like with the amount of experience and professionalism that is being built, it gives some comfort, right, to the end user, to builders, that it's something is being built in a future proof, environment with scalable, lightweight, but also secure and interoperable. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, Francisco, like some final thoughts about Tansy, about this whole integration and this future that you see.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think a lot of stuff has already been said, so I'll try to keep it short and sweet. When I think about Tansy and this kind of overarching vision that we all talked about involving Glacis and Moonbeam and other kind of projects that Moonsong is contributing to, um, I think the vision is clear. It makes sense conceptually, and now it's kind of our responsibility to execute, right? I think the Web3 industry is extremely competitive right now. There's a lot of like just supply, right? There's a lot of infrastructure protocols out there, and we're all fighting for like developers, right? This is kind of the holy grail right now, is getting developers to build on your protocol. So, while it's, having the vision, having a vision that makes sense is kind of step one. I think it's far more difficult to like execute properly on all these kind of parallel threads of execution that have to work kind of in harmony together, right? The marketing, the developer relations team, providing proper developer support, documentation, the developer experience. All these competitors are very well capitalized, like Derek said, right? So it is like an extremely competitive market. And, for me, I just feel a big sense of urgency when it comes to just like delivering these things and the day to day and executing and onboarding developers. I think, I tend to focus a lot on that as well, given kind of the current state of the market. So, yeah, and I try to kind of instill that in the rest of the contributors that are working on Tansy as well. And I think that is something that I think about quite a lot these days.
Thanks, Francisco. And we're a little bit over time. I guess we are in the final thoughts here. I'd love to hear from Jacob and then Aaron some final thoughts on this and this vision for the future. Maybe Jacob, can you give your final thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, I've alluded to or mentioned a lot of them, but I think we've got to prioritize, at least for the true end user, not developers. We have to make this as seamless as Web 2, and that's just going to take time. And we're going to have to figure out what the pathing is for all of that. The other thing is, I mean, it's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek joke, but I'm hoping we start seeing a slowdown of net new L1s and instead improving existing ecosystems. The benefit and the downside of the monster we've created is incentives. And I think that's one of the things that makes it hard for the adoption of our space is every 6 months or so, there's a new chain, there's new DeFi protocols, there's a new bridge, there's new wallets. And it just adds to that geometric complexity that not only the end user, but the developers have to choose. Do I go EVM or non-EVM? Do I go monolithic or non-monolithic? Meaning modular. Which DA should I be using? Do I want to do an L2 or do I want to do a side chain or do I want to build on Bitcoin? Until we have, I guess, a kind of natural steady state, which might take another cycle or two on the true base infrastructure consensus and settlement layers. I think that's kind of the growing pains we just have to suffer through as an industry. But I think when we get there, kind of this Pareto efficient distribution, because that's just how my brain works, is when we'll start seeing real unlocks of some of these user experiences and the true adoption that we always are clamoring for instead of the more PvP environment we have right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Aaron, maybe you can give a final thoughts from the Moonbeam side, some final words to our community that is hearing us today.
Yeah, well, first of all, I just want to thank our community, and everyone who joined today, and also this amazing panel, and of course, Thiago, you for hosting. But I think just to kind of want to build on what Jacob was just saying. It'd be kind of good if we could focus on leveraging the assets that exist. So not just building new L1s and so forth, but I think what we've been talking about here is like, how can we leverage these services and infrastructure that already exist, that are already pretty good, but like let's work on improving them and having them work together. Because as we were talking about with Tansy and so forth, if I'm building an app chain, right, if I'm specializing in something, do I then want to worry about how where I get security from? Do I have to have my own validator set and so forth? That's a bunch of work, right? Do I need to, now I got to get liquidity and on-ramps and all these things and indexes and marketplaces and so forth. Do I want to have to do all those things? I mean, it's just not feasible for project teams to build everything every time, they have an idea. It doesn't make sense. It's not a good use of collective brain power and resources across the industry. And so we need to focus on bringing these things together and having them, as Derek said, where the sum is where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Yeah.
Thank you so much all for your time today. We're 5 minutes over. I would like to thank all the audience, all the community here that is present today. I hope you guys enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. If you want to learn more about not only Moonbeam's roadmap, but the projects that we're talking about, like please make sure to follow the speakers here, but also the teams, right? The project teams as well. So they have the tweet you can find here in this channel. And if you have any comments, any thoughts, please make sure to ping us. You know where to find us. We will be there. Thank you all for your time today, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, Thiago.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.